So John, I was editing Byron's first 20 dispatches of his experience, kind of first person from the owner transitioning this week. And going through those, I realized there's one of them early on that talks about when you kind of step forward with the idea of getting into M&A advisory. And I know we've told this story internally tons of times, but I guess could you go back and talk about kind of what you were seeing and why that was the natural next step, why it made so much sense to you?
To come into this world of advising business owners?
For transitions, for specifically wait, we're already at the table, we're already prepping them. I think that one of the things you said was there were deals that you were working on where it was wait, I teed everything up and then it was somebody else stepped in for the last mile or something like that. I guess.
Yeah,
I was curious how
it really goes back 15 years, and I think that, coming out of law school, when I accelerated and thrived in law school was negotiation, the contractual side of a deal, not only understanding that theoretically, right? And the theories there when you have that education. Where we were lucky and we would come out from what I think is a unique angle was all of the thousands of hours of managing high-level, board-level projects and consulting around getting them ready to really the core of succession and business continuity planning was and that understanding got you in the boardroom and got you a ton of experience. But what happened is that we were so good at that, becoming that most trusted advisor and that resource that was really getting them ready, that it was almost looked like that we were more performance-based and consultative than actually getting rewarded for ultimately the deal. When we had done everything that needs to get ready to create valuation increase or a higher multiple because of tying in a management team, building a strategic plan that they're operating out of that is actually hitting the projections, and then tying those same projections to performance-based compensation plans like stock appreciation, fame stock, or even minority interests. But then ultimately, they being in such a good position from a third party valuation perspective that you didn't get that reward. And then part of that was also intertwined with compliance and the business relationship we had with the broker dealer at that time. So it wasn't all because of the MTA, it was multifaceted, but that led us to, I always kind of wanted to do that, but there was the leap. We had a good business there. We had a lot of built-in referral network, and we were the most trusted advisor, which feels really good. But we weren't maybe getting rewarded for the transaction or at least the value that we helped create. Several years ago, as we got our independence from that broker dealer relationship, which we still have a high value for. But it allowed us personally and us to focus on our business and maybe what was the building blocks that got us to a point to be in a really unique position in the M&A space because of all that work. But now that we're able to create the value rather than just get there and value the company and sell what it can sell it for. And so that allowed us to be in a position that's one, unique to the marketplace, but two, now we can get rewarded for creating that value. And so that's been the success, the precipice of the success in the last few years, seeing more transactions close that we were getting the credit for the closing for rather than the preparatory work leading up to that close.
Connor, what was it like when John brought that idea up? It's natural for you?
In line with John, seeing the value that we were bringing to the table to the clients that we were working with at that time, it was, I think, a natural evolution or a next step
to that close.
Connor, what was it like when John brought that idea up? Did it feel as natural for you?
In line with John, seeing the value that we were bringing to the table to the clients that we were working with at that time, it was, I think, a natural evolution or a next step as we were thinking long-term for the McFarland Group of what do we want to be doing? How do we want to be positioning ourselves with our clients? As John mentioned, we had some of that was driven by the compliance with the broker-dealer that we had a relationship with, and that's a valuable relationship. And it was a big decision to be made to essentially go independent or away from that. And but over the years and as we were having success with the clients that we were working with at the time, the leap or the independence move made sense. And since then, I think we were right in that decision, and we've we've been able to essentially do more, one for our clients, and then obviously do more for the McFarland Group itself. So it's been, I think, in my mind, a win-win from making that move. But when John was talking about that and bringing it up, I saw it as kind of the next step of, yes, this is what worked for the last 10 years for us, 15 years for us. Now let's think forward for the next 10 to 15 years of what do we want to be doing and where do we want to be. And I think it was just kind of a point in time where we reached that maturity or that next step of, okay, here, let's make it and go independent. Again, I think it's been beneficial for our clients and for ourselves.
You just had a couple of conversations this week that relate back to the how are we, like, the flavor of being different. I think, John, you talked about the difference between a broker and an advisor, and that came up in a conversation earlier this week. What does make our service different from maybe some other firms that are offering brokerage service?
Yeah, I think a couple different things. Just that specifically to me, and it's a needed service. The broker is more of getting to the deal once the person's ready to sell, and maybe doing some level of underwriting, but then listing the deal, and maybe not as actively promoting that deal to the marketplace as you would in an investment bank or an M&A advisory firm. But I think more than that, it speaks to not just the process itself, but the sophistication that's maybe going into the underwriting process, the size of the deals that you're doing, and probably uniquely to the McFarland Group, that empathy that I referred to, that I look at our founder as a bit of a business owner whisperer, if you will, and ability to understand the business owner, like beyond the quantitative side. Like pretty much all three of those categories just listed should be able to and can do the quantitative side. It's the qualitative side of the understanding the unique sets of both the business itself, the actual operating entity, but then the leaders of it, the founding owner or the majority owner, or whoever the decision maker is, who's brought us into the deal to bring them to market, and then the people that are supporting that make that business transferable. I think we have a little bit of a unique recipe in understanding that, and then ultimately portraying that to the marketplace. And then I think probably the network speaks to it too. We have a pretty vast national network of both business owners that could be on the sell side, but also buyers on that side, or professional service providers that are providing introductions to those buyers that may be more expansive than, some of the websites or other places you post those, which we also utilize at times too. It's not a subtractor to use that. It's more of that plus additional resources that you can bring to the table.
Yeah. Okay. So that raises, I think, a really simple question, but and it's not but for like an owner to understand what is underwriting. Let's all go into it. What does deep underwriting look like versus, what are the levels of it, and how does that impact their goals?
Probably starts with the credentials of the team doing the work and their experience, right? I mean, more deals you see and the more expertise you have in a given area, for instance, valuation versus maybe the legal side, or the HR piece that really comes out of one understanding, what could be a trap there in due diligence, but really the ability to actually understand where the human capital is created and how to portray that and how to tie it in. And then, it's the way we're doing that up front, we're usually starting even before underwriting some sort of consultative process to determine even what the pathway is and where your gaps in valuation might be that would lead to when you would sell and who your buyer might be. External, internal, PE firm, strategic, etc. But then it's the deep dive into what I would say the preliminary due diligence is, building the data room ahead of getting the transaction, so we're not being reactive to anything that could be, again, a gap or a detractor from value, or ideally the other side, additive to value, something that was strategic, unique, that would create additional multiple or additional ultimately valuation for the company. It's a good question, though. I don't know how well articulated the difference in the deep dive, but it's that quant, I guess, is what I was describing there. And then again, going back to the qualitative side and the ability to understand what truly makes a business operate and valuable, which we believe ultimately is the people. And so the better you can understand that and then ultimately portray that and ideally tie them into the result, I think the more successful transaction you're going to have, both in terms of value and transition for the buyer into their integration process as they go on and, continue to grow to the next level or next buyer or whatever their strategy is for that acquired organization.
Yeah, I think when you look at the underwriting phase and how that could be differentiated slightly from, say, what McFarland Group versus some other firm does is I think the components there are, one, the experience of the team and the background of that team. So having perspectives from a banker, having perspectives from an accredited valuation analyst, having backgrounds from the legal side, having backgrounds from the tax side or CPA side. Like all of that, as you work to underwrite a deal, essentially create a better picture for where the business is and what the value drivers are from, and that would all be, say, tied to the quantitative side. And then to John's side, where the experience comes in is the qualitative side of understanding who are the people that are creating value. And with that ties into, okay, how are they being retained? How are they being rewarded? How are they being aligned with ultimately the vision of the owner of going through with a sale transaction? So having familiarity with how compensation plans or incentive plans can work and creating that alignment, I think goes a long way as you're looking at setting up a company for.
So if I needed to like capture underwriting, talking to somebody at a bar, like an owner that's like thinking about selling, the underwriting process is, how much is my business worth? What are the factors that are driving it? How do the people tie into it? Like, what are the simple questions that we're answering? Maybe it would be helpful to think about.
I think it'd be kind of it aligns well with our transferable value report, where it's really, we do and John comment on it, but do a deep dive of essentially understanding the business itself, doing an understanding or a detailed understanding of the goals and objectives of the ownership group, doing a calculation of value where we come up with what we think a range of value is, and then using that to educate them on what are the potential options of pathways forward, and what makes the most sense. And so I think going through that experience sets you up well for moving through the underwriting phase if you're looking to go to market.
Yeah. And again, you're diving into a range, but that range is also based on the market, industry, defining a buyer pool, which is multifaceted in itself, right? I always ask an owner, is it about price or is it about fit or is it about both? If it's just about price, you're going to open up that buyer pool a little wider than you probably would if it was about fit. So you're going to underwrite the buyer pool as well, which will help define the valuation range and then internally, based on what you've understood quantitatively of the business itself, it's going to define terms. If you have a business that has a higher risk level, like that's asset intensive and you're looking for maximum value, and you have a smaller buyer pool than a business that maybe has less assets and has really good margins and has diversified buyer and an industry that's in high demand, you're off the bat going to get a different multiple range. And then it would define from there who the buyers are on the yes list and who might be on the no list and who might be on the maybe list. And that's going to be part of the underwriting process too. So it's the quantitative analysis on the business itself. It's the market analysis of who might be buyers in this space and how that pertains to the quantitative side. And then it's the qualitative side, which would then drive, what is the value drivers of the business? Who do we need to tie in? What's key to this? You're maybe even doing, you're definitely doing even on a third party sale, probably more specifically, you're doing a deeper dive into their actual operations, their products or their services. What are they selling? What is their best selling items, or what is their growing sector divisions of their company or products of the product lines of their company? And that comes out of, I wouldn't say one interview. It's a series of interviews and understandings with the owner. If they have a performance coach, I'd say that is really informative to that part, because a big part of this, we're looking back typically 3 years historically. I'd say boilerplate. It can be industry specific and depending on the history of the business or the cyclicality of the industry. But typically we're looking back 3 years and we're looking at a year to date or trailing 12 over the last 12 months. And ideally then we're also showing what the projected year end and maybe even beyond looks like. And projections are just projections until you have more verification. And if you work with a performance coach that's done their job, or any advisor that's done their job, that's been helping articulate projections and then verifying them compared to actuals over at least a period of time that's greater than a year, that's going to help inform, again, that valuation range and the ability to sell this and ability to tell the story, and what where there might be growth opportunities, which is going to be key, especially in a maybe an add-on to an existing PE platform company that's looking to hit a growth rate. So we can help verify what their ultimately projections would be, which would help them back in to ultimately their valuation of the enterprise.
To take a step back, you talked about fit versus price. That's something that it probably is. Is it more common than somebody might think? That really, like, the businesses that we serve, are they weighting, what are they weighting more typically when they come in? Price or fit, or is it a individual kind of thing for both?
I'd say particularly for founders, and I'd say maybe just the makeup of the business owners that the profile of the business owners that we're talking to. It's intentional, but it's also happened because of our network and maybe even the way we're targeting businesses is we like to work with people that value their people. And we believe that's also leads to businesses that are better and therefore get a better valuation, right? You don't have to look for a quote from a guy like me to know that people drive business value. I'd say most of the business leaders that have been very successful in our society have had that same mentality. So if we understand that, we can go about that underwriting process in a different manner that may lead to it. Like, I guess what I'm saying is, if we know that the business owners value their team, we know they probably have a pretty good enterprise, which probably makes it more sustainable, because they've put people in positions to make decisions and create that sustainable, transferable value long term. So we've been lucky in that regard, and maybe it's something that we target. I wouldn't want to work with someone that's just purely doesn't care about their people, but that doesn't mean they're not all about price either. So it's a fit, I would say, does lead it, but there's also money. Cash is king, and we are in the business of making money when we're doing this. So there's a spread to that. And by way of example, like, we had a deal earlier this year that was, gaining multiple by the day or the week during the marketing process. And so we started that where price and fit were equal. We cared a lot about who we were selling to. We got pretty lucky that we were able to narrow it down to about 4 or 5 potential acquirers that we thought could be a good fit. And then we got into a bit of a bidding war where then, price became a bigger percentage. So let's say we were 50-50 price and fit at the beginning. We were probably 70-30 or 60-40 price versus fit because we had a good fit and there was difference between some of the final offers that came in. So at that point, it does shift. It's a fluid thing, but we are working with people that I would say in general value their team, which means they care who buys them because they care about the people within their company.
That's got to be something different than if, like, from a broker's perspective, is like, that's not a series of challenges or opportunities that they can really address.
Look, I'm not
right?
here to talk down or up to anybody. It's if it looks more like a piece of like an asset that isn't living, breathing, and not to pick on real estate either, but if it's real estate, it's a comparable, and here's the price, and that's what you go sell it for. And you may not, if you're just putting a sign out in your front yard, you typically don't care who buys the real estate. You care about if you're getting the value that you think it's worth. What's unique about a business compared to, let's say, real estate is it's a living, breathing organization. There's people within it whose livelihoods depend on it, whose families' livelihoods depend on it. And so it's a different level of care. And not to mention, maybe even more importantly, the sweat and most business owners that we work with, especially founders, their personal life and their business life are very intertwined. It is very much a part of their character, the business that they founded. So they care about it from a personal, very, very personal standpoint as well, beyond the people. It's part of who they are, right? It's their baby. And so not only that, taking care of the people leads to them caring about who buys it ultimately. And that's going to go back to maybe even how we underwrite it. Underwriting could also be pathway. If you're really, you have the people in place, and fit is much more important than price, then maybe your management buyout. And it's in a town that the town's very dependent on the business, and you want to make sure it stays intact and stays in that community. That might drive you to go that route and give you the control that you don't get in a third party sale, post transaction.
Connor, that's interesting because you're talking soon in the next several weeks to a community organization that's really asking these questions, like how do we keep these businesses in Omaha? Can you talk about that? Like what you were hearing from them and what you're going to talk about?
Yeah, we were introduced to the Omaha Chamber of Commerce and was introduced by Community Bank Dundee Bank as a potential good partner in this presentation, and look forward to being a part of it.
And I think when you told me about what the chamber was talking about was there's a number of businesses that are there are a lot of jobs locally, and their anxiety is how do we maintain those jobs? Is that kind of what was on their mind when going into that? Is how do we sell these businesses such that we preserve the value that they're providing the community?
Yeah, their focus is to ensure that as people are thinking about planning for their business transition, that they account for keeping the company in Omaha or in whatever town that they're in. And so there's jobs that was one thing that's obviously the primary focus, but the other thing was investment. So continued investment in building new spaces, purchasing additional equipment from, that just all feeds the local economy. So their whole thing was, as people look to explore exiting their business and they're looking at third party sales, and they're looking at firms that are national that are coming in and interested in acquiring either as add-ons or just because they like the business, ensuring that those buyers or as owners have those conversations with those potential buyers that maybe they're thinking about, and how do they ensure that the people that they sell to maintain the roots here. So yes, it's jobs, but it's also the investment that comes along with having companies operating.
Well, I think that's going to be a great presentation. It'll be interesting to see. It'd be interesting for me to learn more about what are the limits that are going to be available around that, and how much influence can an owner actually have, and what actually. I think the other point of the TVR that we've talked about is just like when the rubber meets the road, when you're looking at the cost of the legacy, how much legacy are you willing to protect versus what are your financial needs and goals. So I think that's probably we covered a lot of ground today. I think we can call it good.